Send your Spirit, God, to open our hearts and our minds to your word and strengthen us to live according to your will. In Jesus' name. Hearing today's parable of the sower just now reminds me of a time about 20 years ago now when I preached in this pulpit about the very same reading. It was one of the few sermons I ever gave here that evoked a really angry reaction. Now, I didn't say anything particularly inflammatory about the story, except to observe that the passage comes in two parts. Jesus' public parable of the sower, and then the private explanation given to his companions. Now, being a bookishly nerdy kind of guy, I observed, quite uncontroversially, I thought, that most Bible scholars accept the parable, the first part, as genuine, but think that the second part, the explanation, was made up later by the church. So I announced that I was only going to talk about the story and not about the flimsy allegory tacked onto it. You would have thought I had spit on the flag. I stood out there at the northwest door and received nothing but angry accusations. Who do you think you are to tell us that Jesus didn't say that? I was stunned. Remember, this was All Saints Pasadena. Not some Orange County megachurch. Most of the folks here can't even say the creed without crossing their fingers. Yet here they were giving me grief for the merest mention of New Testament criticism. For weeks, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting villagers with torches to come and ride me out of town on a rail. I did keep my job. George was in England on sabbatical, and I guess no one knew how to write to him there. And so I did learn my lesson. So here goes one more time. Let's talk about this parable, shall we? But we'll talk about only the parable. I will leave the scholarly opinions to others. That is one interesting All Saints story, and here's another one. When I worked here in the 1990s, I was really fortunate to have shared some of my time with a retired priest who I loved and admired very much, a man named Larry Carter. Larry had been the longtime rector of St. John's Church downtown on Adams in Los Angeles. And he was one of my heroes. His ministry at St. John's had been an expansive peace and justice ministry. He was known to be a fearless advocate for peace and for minorities and for the poor, and he even shut the doors of St. John's for several years until the Vietnam War ended. My image of Larry was as a fierce prophet. So imagine my surprise once in a Bible study that I was leading when Larry said that the opening of today's gospel story was his favorite passage in the New Testament. Jesus got in a boat and sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. Something about that picture of Jesus teaching from a boat while people listened from the shore touched Larry deeply. And because it touched him, it touched me. Apart from the content of anything Jesus might have to say in this story, this image of him in the boat teaches us something about what it means to live a centered life, grounded and at home in God's creation. Hold that thought. Today's gospel is this familiar parable of the sower, and whenever I hear this parable, I see two images in my mind's eye. With Larry Carter's help, I see Jesus teaching from the boat, and with the aid of my memory and a little postcard I have on my desk in my office, I see Vincent van Gogh's great painting, The Sower, which depicts a man striding through the fields, casting seed in every direction. You and I live so much in the modern urban mental world that we have to exercise some imagination to get to what sowing and seeds meant to pre-modern people. A seed, after all, is a tiny, mysterious miracle. In this compact package lies a hidden something that can produce life itself and can do so abundantly. We put seeds in the ground, and amazingly, plants and shrubs and trees come up as if by magic. It's not surprising that Jesus would use the seed as a symbol of God's creative, mysterious abundance. Something big lies hidden within something small. And the way that works is entirely hidden from our view. According to Jesus, God is like that. Mysterious, abundant, miraculous, hidden. So let's sit with this parable of the story of the sower for a minute. What might that parable be saying to us, about us? What might it be saying to you or to me about ourselves? If you have ears to hear, as Jesus says, listen. I spent a good part of my adult life before coming here in 1990 studying and teaching American literature. I studied and taught especially the people we call the Transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and Emily Dickinson. They too were alive to the power of the seed as an image, not only of fertility and abundance, but of the cycle of life and death and rebirth. Emerson and Thoreau lived and wrote during the 19th century, the age of the rise of science, the time of Charles Darwin. They were alert to the complexity of the processes of natural selection at work in the dispersion of seeds. But Emerson and Thoreau lived in an America that was also still mostly rural and agricultural. So they saw seeds scientifically, yes, but their intellectual awareness of what seeds did and how they worked did not stop their seeing seeds in a more nuanced way, as part of the farming life of planting and cultivating and harvesting, and therefore as metaphors for life and its processes. Emerson said that the seed was God manifest in the mind, of which the beauty of the world is the flower and goodness the fruit. Toward the end of his life, Thoreau became preoccupied, and you might almost say obsessed, with the way plants propagate themselves, and he increasingly saw seeds and their dispersal as a powerful figure of life and death and rebirth. At the end of his book, The Dispersion of Seeds, Thoreau exclaimed, "The very earth itself is a granary and a seminary." And remember that the word seminary includes the Latin word for seed in it. So that to some minds, its surface, the world's surface, is regarded as the cuticle of one great living creature. This little miraculous package that makes the holistic vision of life possible is, of course, the seed. So my question here this morning goes like this. What right now might this story mean for you? What might it mean for you to think of God as someone who is scattering seeds all over the place? What might it mean for you to think of yourself in relation to those seeds? Are you the path or the rocky ground, the thorns or the good soil? Or might you be all of those? What do these seeds represent? How might we let the truth on offer in this story germinate and sprout within us, bringing forth fruit 30 or 60 or 100-fold? Now, I will not, like Matthew, try to give you an allegorical interpretation of this parable. You see, I still can't let this go. But I will tell you of how I hear the story this morning. Instead of thinking of the types of soil as types of people, I hear the story asking me to think of the types of soil as aspects of myself, perhaps as periods in my life. There are times when I seem to be open to what God is up to in the world and ready to respond to and participate with God and others in God's creative, redemptive, and healing work in the world around me. And I'd call those the good soil times. Then there are times when I am more closed to God and God's promptings, and I resist seeing myself and others as God would see us. Those are the path, the rock, the thorny times. The point of this story, I believe, has less to do with characterizing different kinds of people than it does simply with seeing ourselves as always involved in an ongoing process of life and death and rebirth. There are times when I am alive and open, and there are times when I am closed and as good as dead. That cyclical, rhythmic process of life and death and rebirth goes on all through the course of our lives. And if I'm hearing this story aright, and I think I am, then it seems that the Christian experience is more like a cycle or a process or a journey than it is like having a once-for-all conversion moment. Some days I'm good soil. Some days I'm thorny, rocky ground. And when I take this parable in, I know myself to be converted almost daily. And that's because I can be thorny, rocky ground almost daily. But on good days, I exhibit some of those qualities of the good soil too. And I think that's how it is for all of us. Over time, we move with God in the right direction. Over time, those seeds do take root. And mysteriously and graciously and surprisingly, we become the people God created us to be. The good news this morning is that God is like the sower, as Jesus describes him in today's parable. God goes out to sow, God scatters the seed, this miraculous package of mysterious life. And God scatters that seed indiscriminately with almost reckless and joyful abandon. God does not select certain types of people who are predestined or privileged to get it. God does not select certain moments in your life when you are going to get it. God knows that you and I will get it for a while, and then we won't get it, and then we'll get it again. God does what God does. God sows the seed indiscriminately, abundantly, and generously. God is always coming towards us, opening up the possibility for us that God's love and hope and blessing will take root and bloom and blossom and bring forth fruit in our lives. And that takes me back to the thought I asked you to hold earlier on. That thought was about the opening picture of Jesus sitting in a boat, teaching his companions in parables. The image my friend Larry Carter thought the most beautiful picture in the New Testament. Jesus was at home in that boat because he was at home in the world. Jesus lived a centered life, grounded and at peace in God's creation. You can live that life too. Summer is the time when we have the possibility of slowing down, of moving to a different rhythm, a time when we can, if only for odd moments, rest and relax and open ourselves just enough to let some of those divine seeds come into us and do their transforming work in our bodies and spirits. Remember that another 19th century writer, the novelist Henry James, said, "The two most beautiful words in the English language are summer afternoon." As you go about your life this summer, I invite you to picture Jesus teaching his companions from a boat. And then I invite you to picture God sowing those seeds in your direction. If Jesus could relax, so can you. Let God's loving, embracing, renewing purpose wash over you as waves lap against a boat. In so doing, you'll find yourself becoming open to God's promise and God's call to you in ways that you maybe hadn't before. If God's purpose can take root in rocky ground, it can take root in you. The abundance of God's blessings will germinate. They will sprout and bloom and bear fruit, not only in your life, but now through you in the life of the world. Amen.